but it's great that we're now back in the room, as the phrase goes. So this session is about Independent East, and please ignore the fact that I've managed to cut their logo off a little bit. And what I'm sort of wanting to chat about is, what is Independent East? Why did we set up Independent East? What we're currently doing together, and actually probably talk a little bit about the potential. And I said, where are our boundaries? I can't remember if I've actually put a slide in about that one, so we can talk about that as well, perhaps at the end. I've got quite a few slides, apologies for that. The line is always, I didn't have time to write a short presentation, so I wrote a long one. Someone is just joining us. Hopefully that all makes sense. So what is Independent East? I've got sort of a collection of slides here to explain what we are. So it's 5 housing associations working together. So it's ourselves, it's Freebridge, which is the stock transfer housing association for the Kings Lynn area, West Norfolk. It's Havebury, which was the stock transfer housing association from Bury St Edmunds area. Orwell, which actually we always say that we're the older brother of Orwell because their registration number with the Housing Corporation was one after us. So roughly the same age, 60-year-old housing association. And Saffron, which was the stock transfer from South Norfolk. And where we are is broadly Norfolk, Suffolk, and we've got a sort of tinge of Essex. We always give Saffron, and I think now Havebury, a little bit of a hard time about being in Essex, but we're really Norfolk and Suffolk. And when we came together, and I have to say this is a really good example of where we came together because of an initiative by our chairs. So when Chris Eubank became chair of Broadland 5 years ago, it was before COVID. I'm looking at Laura, and she's nodding sagely, so it's about 5 years. Chris was really good in that he went out and he talked to all the chairs of the other housing associations in the region. I think he spent in his first year as chair, he spent 43 days just talking to other housing associations, which, bearing in mind he had a full-time job, was a pretty good commitment. And the view came back from the chairs, it's pretty daft us actually not learning from each other. If we've got similar values and we've got similar culture, why don't we get together? Not get together in a merger, not what we call, well, I'm going to say it, but not for repetition. You should really pause the recording at this point. When we were trying to work out what we might call ourselves, we did consider calling ourselves definitely not Flagship, on the basis that Flagship was mopping up housing associations. You know, Victory is now part of Flagship, obviously Peddars Way and Suffolk Heritage, and actually Flagship just announced its merger with Bedfordshire Pilgrims, and I've forgotten which is the other one, but a 3-way merger to form a really huge 60,000, 70,000 size landlord. And actually what we were discussing was actually we had similar focus on local areas. When I first joined Broadland, which was 19 years ago, the strapline of the National Housing Federation was in business for neighbourhoods. And actually, whilst they moved on to other straplines, actually Broadland committed itself to still being in business for neighbourhoods, knowing where it was, knowing that our tenants, knowing our properties that we're looking after, knowing the communities and knowing local authorities, partners. And actually we identified this group of 5 that actually had that same sort of principles, that actually we wanted to be local housing associations. So I haven't put a slide in, an exciting slide in about the governance, but one of the things we did decide was any housing association that joined us had to be domiciled, had to be based in either Norfolk or Suffolk. So when 1 or 2 housing associations in Essex said, that looks really exciting, come and join, we actually said, no, I'm really sorry, but it's about Norfolk and Suffolk. So I think I've sort of said that, it's about collaborating when sensible. Now, a few statistics, and I'll come back to a bit of this. It's not a very exciting slide, it's a Power BI report. And this data is about a year old. Actually, it's probably a little bit older than a year old. It's probably the financial year ending in 2020. So between us, we manage about 30,000 homes. Our combined financial turnover is 180 million. And the assets that we're looking after is about 1.4 billion. So actually quite substantial numbers. Interesting breakdown here. I will come back to this in a later slide for those that might be interested. I'm sort of making an assumption there. You can't leave the room if you're not. But between us, we manage about 20,000 general needs homes. at a social rent. We manage 5,200 homes at affordable rents. And there's a slide later on where you see actually the number of affordable rents that Broadland has is a lot lower than the other associations. And we might touch on that. We provide homes for older people. We've got 100, between us, we've got 132 intermediate rents, which are properties let at 80% of open market. And interestingly, Broadland has 96 of those. So that's quite an interesting one. And we're all, you know, those statistics, we can share the slides later. So when we were starting and thinking about what we're trying to achieve and where we're going, it was thinking about, so let's have some targeted, right at the beginning, you're saying, are there some targeted issues that would be good issues to share? Actually, before I share that, I'm going to go in a different direction. So Independent East, we formed 3 years ago. It was a long discussion for about a year beforehand. And in September of 2019, we signed it all off. It went through all our boards. We told all the people that work at the 5 associations. I'm not sure whether any of you remember what happened in March 2020. Like the Prime Minister coming on television on the 23rd of March and saying we're closing down the country. That actually for Independent East turned out to be, this is really bizarre, you've got to look for silver linings where you can. Actually good news, because in the week of that first lockdown, the 5 chief executives within Independent East met on Teams, actually in that first week on the Wednesday. And we have met every week since for about an hour. And therefore we've developed those relationships of trust and sharing and openness, which I think if we hadn't got beyond that would have been very hard, because actually the benefits of collaboration together only comes when it cascades down whole organisations. And chief execs are quite good at stopping that happening if actually they don't sign up to it. And I think actually that was a really critical part of our journey. And so this slide probably came from about a year ago, really. It was so let's cascade on and let's set up working groups that target different areas. And we were thinking about what are those first questions that we really needed to get the groups to work on. Internal audit, I'm going to come back to internal audit. It is actually, it's a lot more exciting than the phrase sounds. I'm not speaking to any auditors in the room, maybe ex-auditors in the room, but you know, that's another issue. How we keep everyone safe. The building safety bill was coming through. So actually, rather than us all reinventing wheels, can we learn from each other? How do we grow the diversity of our teams? How do we actually really engage with our communities? How do we ensure that people are represented in our workforce, but also that we're providing the right services to different diverse groups of people? The development issue, you know, let's be completely honest, homelessness and housing need isn't going away. You know, we could double the size of each of the 5 landlords and we will still have people on waiting lists. So could we do more together there? And there's this issue about decarbonisation. How do we deliver by 2050 net carbon zero for the organisation? So those were sort of where we were starting. And I just wanted to sort of dip in to some shared initiatives, not all of them. And I was working out when I was actually preparing these slides earlier, that each of the initiatives could have a whole 45-minute presentation all on its own. So what would be interesting later is for you to tell us what would be interesting as another members session at a later date. What would you like unpicked more by the experts for elsewhere in the organisation? So we had shared initiatives. Actually, that's just saying that we got some PR. Now, and this is in no particular order, but it's actually quite a good example. One of the principles was all 5 of us could work together, but we were comfortable if groups within the 5 worked together. And we've worked with Your Own Place, and I'll share a little bit of information about that with a video in a second about how it really works. But 4 of us came together. So Havebury said, you know what, actually we don't need to be involved right now. But the other 4 housing associations, we contracted with Your Own Place, which is a community company, a CIC, a community interest company, to run courses and training and build up confidence, particularly for people who are on their first-time tenancies. One of our real focuses as an organisation across actually all 4 of us, 5 of us, is ensuring that people don't fail their tenancy. You know, we take great pride in that we don't evict very many people at all, and we try our hardest never to. But actually, an abandonment is just as bad, when people just walk out for whatever reason and go somewhere else because actually they can't cope with the responsibility, or their debts get in their way, or whatever it might be. So we've engaged with Your Own Place, and they are delivering courses for 400 tenants chosen from across the 4 landlords. And it's a whole variety. This slide has some examples: banking, housing options, debt and APR, cooking, bills, how to put together a CV, how to get into work. So a whole variety. I thought I could talk about this, but actually it's much better to hear it from the experience of someone who's actually been through the course. So if this works, for one, I'll be remarkably relieved. I might actually be remarkably surprised as well. There's a short video.
I didn't think it was going to be relaxed or anything. I thought it was going to be. I thought it was going to be like an actual. I don't know, like, you know, when you're in school and then you're doing exams sort of thing. That's what I expected. That is what that's what I thought I was going into. So it was a bit nerve-wracking, to be honest. Oh, it was so different. Like, it was so relaxed. Everyone was so nice. Everyone had a laugh, and, you know, we had, like, I've never met these people before in my life, but I was like, because everybody was so nice, it was like I've known them for ages. So it was really, I felt really comfortable. And it wasn't like sitting in an exam at all. It was just like a casual group discussion. I would tell her that everybody's so friendly. They make you feel so comfortable. If you don't know, if you've never done a Zoom call or anything like that, there's like a half an hour like introduction. They show you what to do, which was really helpful for me. And there's just a lot of guidance and help. So I would definitely recommend doing it. Like, I've taken lots from the workshop, but mainly the thing that helped me the most was like the budgeting tips and saving tips, about loads of different places that help you with, like, if you're in debt or anything. There's a lot of suggestions, so I wrote those down, and like, called Step Change, I think it's called Step Change, yeah. So I really appreciated that, and that helped me a lot. Also a good course for if, like, you've got low confidence right now and you think, oh my goodness, I don't know anything about anything, or finances or anything. When you go on to the course, you actually find yourself giving other people tips as well. So it's like, then you feel a bit more confident in yourself, because it's like, oh, I actually do know something. Like, I have helped someone today. So I thought that was really helpful for me personally anyway. So yeah.
So Your Own Place is playing a really key role, and I think actually it's helping us. So we've got a tenancy support team of a certain size, and they can only work with so many people, and actually having the resource for tenants to work with Your Own Place of particular issues, and actually to be alongside tenants from the other 3 housing associations, to hear different experiences, understand expectations and things like that, has been really constructive. And as I say, we jointly procured that for about 400 tenants in this financial year, and then we'll see where we go further forward. But it's a good example of how we can work together. The next slide, I've only got one slide about this, is about learning from each other on tenant engagement and tenant involvement as well. All 5 associations are committed to tenants playing a key role in our organisations, in governance, in helping shape our priorities and giving us right feedback. And we decided to explore a shared approach to engagement. And we went through a procurement exercise, and we decided to work with an organisation called Creative Bridge. And they are consulting tenants who by definition won't be in this room, because they're trying to consult tenants who are uninvolved. And each association has I think, provided between 5 and 10 tenants, so got between 25 and 50 tenants from across the region giving feedback to Creative Bridge, so they can actually work out how do we take it forward to the next step. We really love and enjoy tenant involvement and tenant engagement. And I think I said when we had that, was it Christmas time that we had? Yeah, and I said, the trouble is, we've still got only a very small percentage of our tenants that are really engaged and involved with what we're doing. And the risk of making the assumption that because we've heard it from, I mean, lots of you good people, but because we've heard it in one audience, it's right for everybody across the whole pitch is a difficult one. So we've always known that we've got tenants, and we've actually got people who are just really busy with their daily lives. And the idea of getting involved, no thanks very much indeed. I want to tell you when you're not doing something right, or I want to tell you when you have done something well, or I want to tell you what you could do better. And it's just making sure that we're thinking about that. And I think the ultimate aim, and it won't be this year, and it probably won't be next year, is actually doing what we were talking about when we met at the football club, some of us last September, of actually having a shared tenant conference. So tenants from different organisations can get together and talk about what's going on and take things back to their landlord that we could do better. So that's sort of the ambition, and it's the direction of travel. Now this subject, we could definitely have a one-day seminar. In fact, last June we did have one entire day with the board, where the only subject we talked about in the whole day was decarbonisation. I think we found 8 different presentations to give different angles on the whole decarbonisation agenda. So one of the really early things that we did was pull together, and I was a facilitator for this one, a group from across the associations, because actually we've all got the same problem. We've all got to deliver net carbon zero by 2050. We might have different amounts of money at today's costs that we think we need to invest. Give you an example, Broadland estimates at today's costs that we've got £38 million worth of expenditure between now and 2050 on achieving decarbonising just the housing stock, before we start talking about business operations and things like that. One of the Independent East members estimates their decarbonisation cost is going to be about £120 million. You know, if we make mistakes en route, they'll be expensive mistakes. So if we can work together, it really helps us find the right solutions that we can afford, and also ensures that we're making we're lobbying appropriately. The reality is, I think I might have said this at the AGM last September, Clive Betts, who's the chair of the Levelling Up Select Committee, which is a very strange name for a select committee, but the select committee that sort of shadows the Department of Levelling Up Communities and Local Government, said at a conference last year that he estimated that every housing association would go bust in the country if they had to pay 100% of the cost of decarbonisation without any grant. So we know there's going to have to be grant at some point. So what assumptions? Well, let's make the same assumptions, because at least then we've thought them through. And we're looking at decarbonisation, I suppose, in 3 different areas. I will be very honest, I'm pinching some slides now from Justin O'Connor, who's our head of asset management, who spoke at the board before the board on Tuesday night. So it's about new homes and what Andrew in this little box here is doing. Yes, he waves. You know, so how can we make sure that the homes that we're building today are future-proofed? So we're not giving the head of asset management in 15 years' time a real nightmare because of what Andrew built this year. Our existing homes. You know, I used to say at housing conferences that the reality is the homes that your grandchildren will live in have already been built and are already occupied, because actually however many homes you build across the whole of, you know, the social sector, the private sector, the whole lot, is still a tiny percentage of the number of homes you've got. And it's sort of the same for us. You know, we're building hopefully 150 homes a year for the next couple of years, but we're already responsible for over 5,000 homes. And I'll show you, the next slide actually shows you a bit of the scale of the issue there. And then it's about how we operate as a business. What can we do better? How can we be greener? You know, we're talking the other week about the fact that the next tender for the vans that you see driving around should be for electric vans. So how's that going to work? How can we actually make it work? We would have liked to have done it this time, ignoring the issue of how you're going to charge them. But actually the vans right now don't have the load capability to cope with the amount of stuff that our guys drive around in. But 3 years' time, I think it will be. So we're having to look at all those 3 strands. And I have to say, there's a bit of me. I mean, right back, James.
You haven't mentioned the word sustainability or a sustainability policy.
Yeah, it's underpinned. Because actually, and it's something we did talk about the other night, we could come up with solutions that are net carbon zero that will actually put more tenants into fuel poverty by increasing utility bills. So we've actually got to find sustainable models that ensure that we're looking at the cost in use as well as achieving the green credentials. And sustainability has got to underpin the whole of what we do as an organisation. It's interesting, there's an exciting, if you want to look at it later, there's an exciting green frame on the wall behind the screen. You can't see it from where you're sitting, most of you, which is where we've just been awarded the RESG credentials, environmental, sustainability, social and governance credentials. And actually you package those up and that's about sustainability. It's about sustainability in everything you're doing. And that's where we've got to go.
The certificate only covers a part of ESG.
Yeah.
Okay. But sustainability as a policy for the organisation, do we have one?
Yes, we do. Well, not as a specific policy, because it will be in all policies. Every single report that goes to the board has a box on it about the impact on climate change.
Yes, I appreciate that. But
so we don't pull it out.
If the organisation has a sustainability policy, one document, however many pages, that is reflected in various standards and policies throughout the organisation. But I, as a resident, would like to be able to look at the sustainability policy of the organisation.
I'm going to pick that up and take it away, because the risk of having a huge number of policies is that people stop looking at them. And therefore that our approach has been, let's embed them in the policies that we already have, that we have to have. So somebody who needs to pick up policy A, sustainability with it, rather than thinking, I picked up policy A, I better go and look at the sustainability policy to see if it's coherent with it. So there's something about almost minimizing the number of documents we have, so actually people actually look at them.
If I'm looking at a document, say on purchasing kitchens, for example, I would like to be able to cross-reference that to the sustainability policy to ensure that the purchasing of kitchens for new homes meets the environmental standards set out in the sustainability.
We're probably coming in from different positions. I'm going to agree, but to disagree slightly. I prefer to see sustainability and environmental issues embedded in everything. So if you look at our value for money policies, environmental is there. If you look at every policy procedure that we have as an organisation, climate change is there. So we don't go in naively. And it all comes back to what's in the corporate strategy, saying what our direction of travel is.
So without reading all the standards and policy documents, I won't understand what is the organisation's policy.
I think the risk of coming up with a separate document is it would be something that's constantly got to be cross-referenced, and I don't believe that a lot of staff on a day-to-day or month-to-month basis would actually look at it. And that's why we've tried to always try to be as light as we possibly can, so that we're as effective as possibly can. I'm going to note you disagree with me.
Let's follow up here. What's the basis that you use in writing a lettable standard or a policy on purchasing? Where do you source the sustainability element of that?
It's sourced from the commitments in the corporate strategy, which is the bedrock. What we don't do is refer to every other document that possibly we could do or standards. So when Andrew's building, he's on mute at present, but when Andrew's building, sustainability is absolutely fundamentally in everything he does. And when we look at a development proposal, that's there within the appraisals so that we know exactly where we stand on it. And we had the debate about what's SAT rating or EPC rating, what's happening to foul water, what's happening to surface drainage, etc., etc. So that's actually discussed at a project level every single time.
I would be tricky.
You're always tricky, Richard.
I still go back.
I think I'm going to say this is a good example of where we need a separate session just on that. And so we will do that. And
Because
I
I feel
think,
that residents play a part
yeah,
in the sustainability
Yeah.
policy for the organisation.
Isn't there a white paper on environment?
there's lots of white papers and
Must be
yeah, green
thousands.
papers. Yeah, I mean, obviously we've got to comply with regulation and regulatory expectations, and that includes statutory requirements on us. We have to comply with social housing white paper and this, the direction of travel. We've got an awful lot of building safety legislation coming through right now, which is actually going to keep an awful lot of cost on. And one of the challenges that we've been talking about at chief execs meetings is how we balance those priorities. You know, we could definitely spend every pound we receive 3 or 4 or 5 times, and it's working out how you actually do that prioritisation.
There's nothing worse having policy's sake. Like you say, we have too many policies, everyone goes over everyone's head.
And actually sustainability is really fundamentally in what we do. So on the left of that slide, you've got the SHIFT and the ESG certification. The SHIFT, we've been doing SHIFT for 10 years, and that actually measures the sustainability of the organisation. And I have to say with some embarrassment, we've slipped this year. We're still gold, but we're no longer top in the country, we're second top in the country. Norfolk is a big county, and we drive too many miles getting around the place, and actually that was the one that slipped. So actually we've been measuring and reporting to the board and publishing that report to all staff since we did the first one, which I think is at least 10 years ago, maybe 11 or 12. And we recently got the ESG Sustainable Housing Certificate, and we were the first housing association with fewer than 40,000 homes to be awarded that certification. So it's there. I can't pick up a document and say this is the only document you've got to look at to get an idea of it. And this just shows the journey to 2050. But I think what we'll do is we'll get Justin, perhaps Justin and Barry to come. Barry is our head of procurement, Justin is our head of asset management, to do a member session. I'm looking at Paula, who's nodding, because they can take you through different perspectives of our sustainability approach, and perhaps add in Andrew, who's got his hand up.
Thank you, Michael. Lou, just to let you know, James, Louise and I are behind the scenes just looking at how those policies are going to sit in the future, because Michael's absolutely right. It's within everything, but we can see the benefit of maybe bringing one totally together, certainly with asset and development and purchasing in the future. So it's something we are looking at, James, and we're going to see if there's some real benefit to it or not. But Michael's quite right. At the moment, it's interweaved into every other policy, which it may be better to bring it out. But that's something we're looking for the future. I hope that helps.
Thank you, Andrew.
But so that's the subject that we'll come back to. Flourish. Flourish was a group that we convened under James Francis, who's chief executive of Saffron, and it brought together the HR heads and managers from across the 5 associations. And we gave them this interesting challenge last year. We said, can you first of all go away and define a truly inclusive housing association for us, and then compare us against that definition and work out how we get to where we should be. And they came back and said it's not about protected characteristics, it's about freedom to be ourselves, inclusivity rather than diversity, and they thought that it was already part of our organisational and regional DNA, but we could go further. So they adopted the strapline of #Flourish, obviously thinking about social media at all times, which will please Paula. And actually this is an array of, I think you would call it collateral, communication collateral. You see, I've been on the course, produced by the various different associations. And actually, again, it's got to a point where they really work effectively together. They no longer need involvement of chief execs or directors, just get on with being creative and thinking about exciting things. So these are just some examples of where we've been working together recently. The Human Library, which is where people come together, actually in the virtual world right now, and a person is a book. So, you know, talking to somebody who has a protected characteristic that you know nothing about, and because you're reading a book, you can ask any question you absolutely want, because that's the deal. So you can ask all those questions you've always dreamt about and thought, I can't possibly ask that, that'd be really embarrassing, and actually that's been really productive. Orwell have recently led, I think it's Orwell, recently led on menopause sessions, not just actually for people who might be going through it, but actually also for people who might be managing people going through it or working alongside. Just it's sort of increasing understanding. Mental health awareness, a lot of work there, and we're collectively, well, actually we split. The Norfolk Housing Associations are supporting Norwich Pride, and the Suffolk Housing Associations are supporting Ipswich Pride. So that's an emerging area, and that will carry on. I said that I was going to come back to the exciting topic of internal audit, and you'll be glad to know I've only got one slide, and this is it. Internal audit is a really fundamental part. It sounds dull, and it's absolutely not dull. It's where you get some external people to come in and do a real examination of part of the business and say, are you doing it right? Are you doing it right in terms of regulation or statute? But is there actually good practice elsewhere that you could be learning from that will make you what you're doing better? And each housing association has to have an internal audit function, and we currently contract with TIA, which used to in the old days be the Internal Audit Association. They're now called TIA, which I always throws me because I still want to call them TIAA for some reason. And so is Saffron. And Orwell have got their internal audit contract finishing at the end of this year. And we've started talking about, actually, could we jointly procure and work with the same internal audit company on the basis that they would then really know what's going on in each of the 5 organisations. And they can say, actually, you know, Steph, what Sophie is doing over in Freebridge is this, and have you considered it? And actually, this bit we regard amongst the 5 of you as being really good practice. And this bit over here, wow, you're completely out of line. So it doesn't sound very exciting. We did actually at one point last year consider going the whole hog in a sort of way of actually setting up an internal audit function and recruiting our own internal auditors to work across the 5. And actually we just couldn't work it all out how that would work at this stage. And the other thing is that actually TIA are doing a really excellent job for ourselves and a really excellent job for Saffron. So why would we dump people that are doing a really good job for somebody else? But it's a good example of where we're thinking, can we procure a service more effectively across the 5 of us than 5 of us doing it on our own? It will deliver value for money. Peter?
Yes, I actually have worked in internal audit and still have one job, which is the internal audit for the police, the Norfolk Police, or the Commissioner anyway. The police operate in Norfolk. They collaborate with Suffolk, but in actual fact, the recruitment of internal audit went to 7 different police areas. So they collectively, 7 areas, look for procurement together. And I have to say it works well.
Yeah.
So it is possible.
And I've heard some good examples in the NHS.
Just be things like internal audit. Procurement could be a big issue generally.
Yeah, it's something that it's very much on our agenda, because we were all at key stages with our internal auditors last year, the end of the year before actually. So both Saffron and ourselves were finishing with a firm of internal audit at exactly the same date. We both independently appointed TIA at the same time, and then said, you know what? And we said it to TIA, would it work? And actually they could only see upside. So it's something that we're, it's on the agenda. We're not there yet. Orwell bizarrely have a different financial year. So their financial year ends on New Year's Eve, as opposed to the end of March. So their contract in theory ends on New Year's Eve, and they're trying to work out what they do for 3 months. But actually, I think we will get there, even if they go independently into TIAA as well. But it's about giving the freedom to TIA, to share openly our internal audit reports. And I think that's going to be really useful. Now, I've got some slides here. Yeah, it's arrived. on benchmarking, which I will try to move relatively quickly through, but it's again, it goes back to that, can we do, if you're looking for evidence-based improvements, in other words, knowing that something isn't as good as going somewhere else, benchmarking is sort of the foundation, the bedrock to that. So I've been facilitating a group of performance managers from 4 associations. At this point, Freebridge aren't yet in it, purely because there's some data about Freebridge, but they're not in the benchmarking group, purely because, and it sort of emphasises sometimes the challenge of recruiting in Norfolk. They've had, I think now, 4 failed recruitment campaigns to recruit a performance manager. And because people go off to Cambridge and earn more money, or wherever it might be, or even London, or nowadays you can work from your bedroom at home and work in London. And so they haven't quite joined. But it's all about understanding difference and then also understanding similarities. So we've got some performance reports I'm going to share some extracts from. I need to say at the beginning that it takes us to December. We're missing the last quarter of the financial year purely because a key member of staff at Broadland who's been driving it unfortunately caught COVID before Easter and is still off work with COVID, which sort of emphasised that you've still got to be cautious and is unlikely to be back with us for another month or so. This slide, which you probably can't read, as I said, it's about understanding difference. And just to give you an example, so this is just extracted from financial statements at this point. So you can see, I hate the phrase unit. In Broadland, I vetoed the word unit. I keep saying to people, I don't live in a unit, so why? Then you don't go to an estate agent and say, I want to rent a unit, unless it's an industrial unit or an office. But unfortunately, financial statements have this horrible language. But you can sort of see the relative debt levels of the 5 associations. And the stock transfers go back to what deal did they do with their local authority at the point they transferred. And when Freebridge transferred, which must be about 15 or 16 years ago, they did an amazing deal. So actually Freebridge has only got that top line is the average, if you average the amount of debt we owe per home, Broadland's at the top at almost £35,000. Freebridge has got 7,600. So quite a big range of difference. And then and the other one are sort of financial ratios. So we might be operating in similar areas, we might have similar culture, we might have similar ambitions, but actually our underlying structure, our financial structures are quite different from each other, and it's important to understand that. These give you an idea of tenure. Do you remember, I said on a slide earlier that Broadland doesn't have many affordable rents? I hope you remember it. Well, this sort of slide emphasises, I would point to the screen, but then those joining online wouldn't be able to see it. But broadly speaking, affordable rent came in 2011. Grant Shapps, when he was housing minister, introduced it. And if you were going to get grant in 2011 for new social housing, you had to commit to you had to commit that those new homes would be let at affordable rents, which are roughly let at 80% of open market, including the service charge, where social rents are roughly 62% of the market. And you also had to commit to converting homes that were let at social rents to affordable rents when they became empty, which is why if you look here at Saffron, for example, they've got 2,000 properties at affordable rent and 3,200 at social rents. You look at Broadland, we've got 234 homes at affordable rents in this financial statement, because those were homes that we've built since 2011 without converting any of our existing housing stock. Richard?
Yes, I'm looking at all that and the affordable rents and the social rents, and then looking at the costs, the current economic climate, the costs of decarbonisation and sustainability. For how long will this court of discount continue? And will there be a new kind of poverty coming?
Well, I think there already is a new kind of poverty. One can only hope and pray that it's short term. Utility bills are just getting astronomical. I live in the middle of nowhere, so I rely on domestic heating oil. and I paid 58 pence a litre in January, and I paid 98 pence a litre in March. The cost, I was shocked. On Saturday night, Casper, my wife, and I went to the theatre, and I drove back, and I drove past Tesco's at Five Ways. I needed diesel, and I thought, I'm not going to pay that much. And it was 178.9. And so I went to Morrison's the next day in Fakenham, it was at 184.9.
Yes.
And you think, oh, this is just really scary. So yeah, the reality is we are committed to social rents as being our main tenure. And you can never, the one thing you can never guarantee in life is politics. I'm not saying a party political comment here. If you're talking about decarbonisation over the next 28 years, who knows who will be in government over that period and what decisions they might make. But the reality is quite a high proportion of social rents nationally are paid for, of course, through the welfare system. So if they actually hike the rents up on one side, they're going to have to hike the welfare cost, and that's on the other side. And I think we learned a lot, and again, it's not a party political comment, but when in 1980s we moved to a new funding model for new affordable homes. In the first 25 years of Broadland, basically 25 years, we did not have to borrow much money from the banks because we got almost 100% grant to build new homes. What changed at that point was the expectation you would borrow some money, so we had to increase the rents because the rent was no longer there just to cover the maintenance costs and the management costs, it now also had to cover the mortgage cost. And of course you can't rewind that tape. Broadland today has drawn debt of about £200 million. And roughly 31% of our expenditure each year is on interest costs. So if you move to, if any government of any political flavour the next X number of years move to a model where we've got to borrow more, well, A, you can only borrow against income streams. Banks don't lend to you, you can't pay it back. So it would just kill off new supply. So yeah, but my view is they won't do it. They might want to do it.
It's hard to be optimistic with records of successive governments disinterested in social housing.
Yeah, I remember, and this again isn't a party political comment, but I do remember, so when we were still in the football club as officers and on it every day, at one point, of course, Ed Balls came along because he was chairman of the football club, so he was our landlord, so he came and had a cup of coffee with me about 8 years ago, and he said one of his biggest disappointments of his time in office was the lack of new supply of new social housing. But they did deliver decent homes, and they did deliver a coherent rent model. I don't think any government will ever get it right of any political flavour, because if you put your money over here, you can't be putting it over there. There's something we say constantly at present in Broadland is you can only spend £1 once. So where are you going to put that pound? And I think it's really difficult. Thanks for cheering this up. That was really kind of you. We will pass around the rusty razor blade later. So that just gives you an indication again of difference. We're differently funded, and we've got different profiles of homes. And Broadland has got the fewest affordable rented homes. So when you actually compare our turnover, you'll see our turnover is, I haven't put it in the slide, but our turnover is significantly lower than the others. And it's because we're charging lower rents, which actually does mean everything becomes a bit tighter. You won't be able to see this next slide very well, especially if it doesn't turn up on the screen. Oh, there it is. And this is actually quite interesting, says I. Well, I get excited about it. So this is the housing stock by age of the associations. So I'm going to try to use my mouse in the hope that I can highlight it. I think I'm going to have to stand here. So on the top there, you've got, if you take all the independent lease stock, what's the age? So it goes from pre-1919 through to post-2020, 2011, 20, etc., etc. And the black line is the sector. So if we take the whole sector, all landlords, including local authority landlords, what's the profile? Now, what's interesting, even if you can't read from where you're sitting who the landlord is, if you look at Freebridge, Havebury and Saffron, you've got these bits where actually they haven't got many homes of that age. And that actually was the point when the then government decided new supply would be delivered by housing associations and not local authorities. So council housing wasn't really built between 1981, well, since 1981. I mean, Norwich is getting back into it, but on a small scale. So it's quite interesting because you can then instantly see that Broadland and Orwell have different stock profiles, which actually is quite good for us in some ways, but actually, when you talk about decarbonisation, having some newer stock is more helpful because actually the biggest problems are further back. That slide I skimmed over very quickly back here. That one. That's our housing stock by their EPC rating. So you can see we've got one property at Neff. And actually the bulk are C and above. And this is where we've got real priorities. But actually, if you take Havebury, they got many poor properties that are at the D level. So that was the age. And then this is size of home. And actually, this is equally interesting because we're all very similar and we're all uncomfortably similar. In other words, these small stubs here are 4-bedroom properties. And that black line again is the sector profile, and the social housing sector is not well set up for large families, which is a major issue because there are large families. Quite often they're sort of what I would call merged families, where there's lots of step brothers and sisters because two people have come together, and actually the whole sector suffers from that. And 4-bedroom properties are more expensive to build, and the rent doesn't go up in line with the build cost, so they're more difficult to fund. Then I thought I'd give you a little bit of performance data, just so you again compare. The vaguely red bars are Broadland. The light pale blue is Havebury, dark green is Orwell, and the yellow, funnily enough, is Saffron, which is sort of in line with the colour of saffron. So this one gives you an idea of current tenant rent arrears. So that's a classic example of the conversation that we were having at Chief Execs when this came out is, so what's going on at Saffron and what are Orwell doing better at? Comes back to that internal audit point. By having the data, you can start saying there's something really interesting here. And I'll come to one in a moment, which I think is really interesting, which Steph will really always enjoys looking at housing with care. Relet times for general needs homes. Again, it's just really interesting because you'll suddenly say, what's going on at Havebury? And again, actually Broadland was doing quite well within that particular period. So what were we doing differently? Not better, but differently, that achieved a different result. This is sheltered. I thought you'd be interested to know this one. The reason there is no red bar on the far side is we did not let any sheltered between April and June last year. And then you can see little stubby bits. Again, so what's going on at Saffron that they've got so many empty? And then housing with care, which is always a deeply depressing one. And this graph completely hides the real story because it starts, it's a really small index. I was very excited. We had a board meeting on Tuesday, and I think I can say with confidence it was the first board meeting since 2009 when we didn't talk about housing with care and the challenges of getting them let. Now, this is interesting. Red is bad news. So if we take this one here, the average relet time is 151 days. Now, no one in their wildest nightmares believes there's not demand out there for housing with care. We know it's a really, really good, it'll be somewhere I'll be very happy for my parents-in-law to move into. But social services in Norfolk County Council and North don't seem to have the right process because we're here and Saffron's here, so almost the same. But all their housing with care is in Suffolk. So it's a really good example of where we're able to say, so what is going on well with Suffolk County Council that Norfolk County Council aren't doing, that we can learn from and hopefully influence Norfolk County Council to change. Now, actually, Saffron have improved But they've improved the cost of now they fund a social worker just to work on their housing care lettings.
What
And that
would
may
be
well
wrong with
be
the
where-
idea of having the housing with care on a similar site to ordinary sheltered housing? One of the great drawbacks of fear that people don't go in because they leave their friends, they leave their familiar environment.
Yeah, I know. So my parents-in-law, who are 91 and 87, are just moving to a retirement bungalow behind the GP surgery in Swanton Morley, and there's a residential care home also in the scheme. So if actually they did need to move, or one of them needed to move, it works. Yes, so that's number of empty homes. So then you can see that's the one that shows you the impact of the fact that Saffron are funding a social worker, because we have far too many homes empty. And then that's reactive repairs performance. And so that's judging it by first time fix, right first time. We're not as good as I want us to be, but actually we're not as bad as we could be, if that sort of makes sense. It's encouraging to see that actually our performance isn't. Now, what's really interesting though is that, and I haven't got the slide for this one, that Orwell have a much lower right first time percentage when we were looking at doing a deep dive on it, but tenant satisfaction is higher. And what was peculiar was when they did a deep dive, they found that some tenants were saying it was right first time, even though the operative came back the next day, because they had different expectations. They never expected it to be done that day. They were going to come out and they, oh, you need a new tap, I'll go and get a new tap. So when they came back the next day with the new tap, it sort of worked. So there's something quite interesting there as well, which we need to unpick and understand. Because the ambition is that all 5 of us should get better. As opposed to saying, oh, well, actually, not bad, we'll just stick there. If there's any examples across any of us that we're doing things differently that gets different results, that are better results for tenants and better results for the organisation, then we should be doing it. So that was my benchmarking bit, and I'm running out of time.
I'm wondering though about,
Yeah.
because we had a meeting, I can't remember what it was, a trap pip, whatever. And I was thinking, are there enough people to fulfil all these, high marks?
It is hard work.
And this is what,
We
you can't, are you?
Yeah,
can
we
you
know, for
really
example,
justify that?
it's
when
very
everyone's
difficult.
running around like there's chickens anyway.
We've got to improve scheduling. We know we've got to improve scheduling. We've got to get through the backlog that COVID gives us. We've got to get to a point where we don't have people going off sick with COVID. If one of the guys and girls goes off with COVID, who's in a doing an operative role, the minimum number of jobs that we lose is 25, and normally nearer 35 or 40. And suddenly the backlog's back again. So we the ambition is that I want COVID to go away, and I wouldn't, being honest, I don't want monkeypox to turn up either, thanks. I just would like to get to a period where we don't have a health crisis.
An internal recruitment agency.
Pardon?
Rather than an external service.
Yeah, it's really interesting. I was talking about this with Anita, who's the chief executive of Freebridge. Recruiting operatives in King's Lynn is almost impossible in any trade, even if you pay a lot of money.
Unless you have the internal, you don't give so much to the HR.
Yeah. So, I moved on to the next slide. Beg pardon. This slide, I deliberately made that photograph on the left quite small because I was wearing shorts. I'm sure you don't want to see my. But that is a group of the chief execs and exec directors from across the 5, who a couple of Fridays ago we did a sponsored walk. Let's be honest, it wasn't a very hard sponsored walk. We did 8 miles, 4 miles before lunch, 4 miles after lunch.
How long was the lunch?
And we had fish and chips at Waltherswick, and it was very nice actually. But the reason we were doing it was this woman here is Jo Richardson, who's currently the president of the Chartered Institute of Housing. And today is her 46th day of walking 22 miles. And she's been following the coast path down in the West Country. So I think somewhere in Dorset or Devon she started, she's going all the way round. And she is doing it to raise money for a campaign of the CIH called Homeful, which is about homelessness and understanding the reasons and causes for homelessness and coming up with solutions to homelessness. So we did our little bit. We decided we weren't going to drive down to Cornwall to join her, because actually that would have been a bit of a major time commitment. But instead we did a walk and we talked to her on the mobile phone. And I think at the time we were walking in vague sunshine, she was walking in the rain on her own. So it just sort of shows that we can just do things together, and it doesn't need to be really serious stuff. And actually, I think there were lots of really interesting conversations that took place during that day. So again, the more you get people to talk by being in the same room, which is why face-to-face is so much better than just looking at a computer screen. And a computer screen, complete divergence. Computer screens are a real nuisance, actually, sometimes. I chaired the Norfolk Strategic Housing Partnership board meeting a couple of weeks ago, and I had 26 people on Zoom, and some didn't turn on their cameras, and you weren't actually sure whether they were really there, and actually you couldn't read the room in the way that you do read the room, and people don't have those conversations they have in the sidelines when they're making a cup of coffee or a cup of tea. So talking about people coming together face to face, we are planning on the 4th of November having a board and active tenants conference at Dunstan Hall. We're currently in the planning stage. We've invited Kate, the director, the new director, the regulator who spoke, any of you were there in September at the football club, and she's leading on consumer regulation, and we're putting that together. And it's another instance where I think getting people in the room, getting people to talk to people from different organisations and different experience is going to be really beneficial for us all. And then you'll be glad to know it's my last slide. I think there's huge potential for the future. But what I will say completely upfront, there is no potential, and it's not being discussed, about ever any of us merging with each other. That's why we called ourselves independent. And the reason it's called East is for Norfolk and Suffolk. So that conversation does not take place. I'm quite amused by the fact that David McQuaid from Flagship has taken all my 4 other colleagues out for lunch. Funnily enough, he hasn't bothered inviting me to lunch, but I think he knows what the answer will be up front. The relationships which are cascading down the organisation and people are just getting on with things are based on that trust and the honesty and openness, knowing from the organisation right at board level that you, as doing this job, have got permission to share warts and all what's going on in your part of the organisation with somebody from a different organisation. Those defensive barriers, where people just want to sort of justify themselves, are coming down, which is really good. We will continue exploring where it's sensible to work together, where we can deliver benefit to the organisation and to our tenants. And I think as we go forward, it will be consistently understanding better what makes us unique as well, and therefore what we can be proud of as independent organisations. And I'm a couple of minutes over 7, so I apologise for that. And Steph is here to answer all your questions. Well, no, we've got Andrew as well on the screen. Still there, waved.
You talked about your own place,
yeah,
and selecting tenants to attend courses. Is that done via tenant support?
Steph, you can probably talk about that a bit more.
Yeah, so it's actually done by everyone in the organisation, but mainly the focus is in anyone working in local delivery or housing. So that includes income, that includes tenancy support, anyone in the local delivery teams. The training has been rolled out and the kind of promotion really, so that anyone coming into contact with a tenant where they feel it would benefit the tenant to attend is able to say, right, we've got these courses. We're going to be promoting them via operatives and repairs when they're going into homes, because people can self-refer. It doesn't have to be us, saying to people, do you want to come along? We want people to go, I've heard about this. I think it might help me. Can I come along? So I think it was just fair to say that we're in the early days of working out what's best, what works best, how we get people on courses, yeah, I think that I think we will get better at that over the coming months. But certainly we've had some real successes already. We've had some people who have gone along and said, actually, I learned quite a lot. I think it's really difficult because people do, and that lady on the video was a classic example, think they're going into a schoolroom environment. And I think that's a real challenge for people because you kind of want to have some fun, you want to go in, you don't want to feel anxious, you want to know it's welcoming. And I think that we need to get more people on them to say, this was my experience and it was really good. And actually, it's okay. I'm not confident around people, but I was made to feel welcome and I didn't feel uncomfortable. So yeah, I think there's more for us to do, but we're certainly trying to say that anyone who has an interaction with a tenant or customer, they can say, we've got this, are you interested?
And I think it was, we certainly from a broader point of view, we saw it as additional to an extra to tenancy support. You know, we've got a good tenancy support team. Compared to the other organisations, we've got the largest tenancy support team. But a lot of the casework that they're working on is becoming more and more complicated. And so when people need relatively low level support, but actually critical to them to being successful in their home, they don't have the time. And so it's almost relying on other members of the team. Whereas instead, you've now got this independent organisation who actually do it day in, day out. And I have to say, I've been through, I think, 2 mock sessions that they've done to show us what it was all. And actually, it was brilliant. It really was. Ways that I would never have thought about sharing information in a really interactive way. And it was fun.
I think the low level of number of tenants who engage fully is very much down to the lack of confidence and teaching people to be confident in their own power. It's been my lifelong passion to see that. And I'm glad to see we are expanding here in that area. And not only that, the quality of people who are coming on board is much higher than I can remember from the past. And that's all to the good. But there should be more and more effort made to give people that confidence.
I agree.
A follow-up question for Stephanie. Was there thought given to stigma for those taking place on those courses?
I mean, one of the kind of underlying embedding principles of Your Own Place, and I hope Broadland, is that shouldn't be an issue at all. So that shouldn't prevent someone, I would hope, going along. And actually, whilst our focus is for people to go on those workshops where we want to sustain tenancies, what I would say to you is there doesn't need to be any stigma, because I went on a course and I learned things that I didn't even know. So I don't think that there needs to be any stigma attached to it, because I think if people who were in intermediate rent, people in all different tenures went along, I think there's things that people can learn. So I don't think at all that there is stigma attached to it. I think what we will know is after the first year, we're certainly going to learn what works, what doesn't work, and actually, is that offer right for our tenants, or do we need to do something that works better for our tenants? So do we need to tweak the offer? What do we need to look at? But certainly I wouldn't expect, James, to have there to be any stigma around it. And actually, in the early days, we've had tenants who have gone along whose tenancy may not be at risk. They may have had a tenancy for quite a while, but they've gone through to meet other people and they've come along and said they've learned something, even though they've had a tenancy a while. So I think it's really important, though, that we keep that on our agenda, because we wouldn't want that to become the case.
I was just thinking that the prospective candidates might feel that they would have
we've got
there
to
would
try on
be
that.
stigma attached to it.
I think you're right, and we've got to be conscious of that. I think the nice thing is getting in a room with people who feel the same. So once we can get them there, encourage them. Peter, you had it.
Yes, I came along tonight because I thought that Independent East sounded exciting, something different, and I'm encouraged by the presentation that you went through. I think the last slide that shows there is perhaps the most important one, because what you can achieve depends upon those relationships.
I completely agree, and actually that's why, funny enough, I said at the beginning that I think COVID and the fact that the chief exec started meeting every single week. I mean, we don't all make it every week. I'm going to miss tomorrow mornings, for example, because we now moved it to Friday because it worked better for Anita, who became chief exec of Freebridge about 18 months, 19 months ago. And we all feel guilty if we don't make it.
And I think that's good.
But it's now the cascade.
You have to,
yeah,
and after the whole organisation has to begin to feel that there is something bigger than just themselves.
And so, for example, so I was facilitating decarbonisation and benchmarking, and I've stepped out of it because actually the people who are actually doing it in each organisation were working so effectively together. Partly I was in the decarbonisation one, even as a surveyor, I didn't exactly understand what they were talking about, and they took pity on me occasionally to explain. But actually, that's what it works, you know. So you've got people in that particular group. We've got Justin, who's one of our senior managers, with a middle manager actually from one of the other organisations, who's got tons of technical knowledge, and that's what we want. We're sending out the message across the organisation. Talk to your colleagues in other housing associations, and we're so giving you permission to be open and honest about our problems.
I also think the timing's right. I'm sorry to hog this.
No.
The British economy is going to be facing some real problems. I think it behoves every organisation to look for what the economy is, how they can improve in every way, how you can achieve more, and this is potentially a way forward.
Yeah,
I hope that the government look, as they have done in the immediate post-war period, to build as part of the way out of recession.
I know some taxes have arrived, but I don't want to have anybody going out of here really depressed. But we had a board meeting in here on Tuesday, and normally that board, the May board, would approve the business plan. The business plan has to be with the regulator by the end of June, and it's a 30-year plan about how we're going to operate financially for the next 30 years. And back in December, we did an awful lot of work on the business plan to inform the board so they could make decisions about the new corporate strategy, which they eventually adopted in March. And without leaving you with a depressing note, the reason we did a workshop as opposed to taking them as a business plan was every single economic indicator assumption had changed since December. So, you know, what you were assuming about inflation, what you were assuming about fuel costs, what you were assuming about building material costs, which doesn't only hit Andrew, but actually building materials are the bedrock of our maintenance activities. The cost of glass has gone up by 20% this year. In fact, we estimate that building cost material inflation is running currently at 12%. And so really difficult decisions about how we actually, and I'll be sharing it with senior managers tomorrow afternoon. And we're going to have to be creative. We're going to have to look for economies where we can, but without diluting what we want to deliver.
What about the lowest paid people within Broadland? Are they going to be supported? So like the people who are the cleaners or? Yeah,
I mean, we're a real living wage employer. So we don't have anybody on 0 hours. We don't have anybody on the national minimum wage. And in fact, James Godfrey and Melissa, who's our head of HR, and myself are on the real living wage working party for Norwich, because we actually, working with the City Council and Aviva and others, want to make Norwich a real living wage city.
You can share some of your wages.
Yeah.
The less fortunate is what I'm thinking.
Yeah.
Seriously.
I mean, inflation is hitting everybody in the organisation, and it will be hitting everyone in this room. I just need to look at how much I put in my car over the last, I think I spent almost £300 on fuel in the last 4 weeks.
Teleportation, that's what we need to invent.
Yes, that would be very nice.
Yeah. the magic
But
carpet.
I'll let you be the first one to go through it, just in case you don't come out of the other end.
No promise.
Okay, I think we probably ought to stop, because I think you said it would be an hour, and I have a feeling that Paul is looking at me evilly at the back. But thank you very much indeed, and we will take away and we'll have an evening about sustainability. It might have to be longer than an hour, and we'll get the experts in the room.
May I just say I was astonished this evening to learn that there was some